Dear students, today we will discuss about the spoilage of cereal and cereal products. As we know, the cereal grains and flours made from the cereal grains contain starch, sugar, nitrogenous compounds, minerals, etc., which all favor the growth of microorganisms. Since the cereal grains and flours contain very low moisture content, they does not allow the microbial growth. Still, the cereal grains and flours contain molds, yeast and bacteria. The microbial load will be there, which are ready to grow if moisture is added. Any increase in the moisture content will allow the growth of mold and bacteria. So, any increase in the moisture content will result in a microbial growth. So, in a wet mash of the cereal grains, there will be the growth of lactic acid bacteria and coliforms, which will initiate an acid fermentation. This will be followed by an alcoholic fermentation by the yeast when the acid level is enough to favor the growth of yeast. As a result, there will be growth of molds and film yeast over the surface of the wet mash. And if acetic acid bacteria is present, it will grow by utilizing alcohol, by converting alcohol to acetic acid. And if the acetic acid concentration is enough, it will stop the growth of molds. In the case of cereal grains, before the storage of these cereal grains, they are not generally processed to remove microorganisms. Their moisture levels comes between 12 to 13 percentage, and the spoilage reasons for spoilage of cereal grains are their levels of moisture, which is 12 to 13 percentage moisture levels, the microbial load, which is already present in the cereals, and the physical damage, if any, to the grains, and the temperature of their storage. Several species of molds are the common spoilage organisms which are responsible for the spoilage of cereal grains, and the molds are Aspergillus, Penicillium, Mucor, Rhizopus, Fusarium, etc. And these grains spoiled by these fungus molds are a potential threat to animal or human beings due to the production of mycotoxins. Now, in the case of cereal grains, there are a few processings involved, and they are dry cleaning and washing of the grains, followed by the milling and sifting of the flour. All these processes will help to reduce the microbial load in the cereal flour. Still, some of the microorganisms may be still present, and generally the cereal flours contain less than 13% moisture. Any slight increase in the moisture content will result in the growth of spoilage microorganisms. In the case of white wheat flour, which is generally bleached by any oxidizing agent such as N oxide of nitrogen, chlorine, nitrosyl chloride or benzoyl peroxide, this bleaching process will decrease the microbial load. The spoilage of cereal flours, when they are moistened enough to allow the growth of microorganisms, depend on the type of microbes present. If acid forming bacteria are present, then there will be an acid fermentation followed by alcoholic fermentation by yeast. If acetic acid bacteria are present, then there will be an acetic acid fermentation. Several other bacteria such as lactic acid bacteria, micrococci, bacilli also may grow, resulting in the production of lactic acid, gas, alcohol, acetoin, small amounts of esters, etc. And their growth will result in a characteristic odor change in the cereal flour. Now, we will discuss about the spoilage of few cereal products. Bread is a fermented cereal product. We know there is a microbial fermentation involved in the bread making, and during this fermentation, if too much time is provided for the fermentation, it will allow the extensive acid fermentation resulting in a sour bread. Similarly, an extensive growth of proteolytic bacteria during the fermentation of bread It will destroy the gas holding capacity of the dough, resulting in a sticky dough. Also, the growth of unwanted microorganisms during bread making will result in the generation of undesirable flavors. Once the bread is baked, it may again acquire certain microorganisms, certain contaminating microorganisms from the environment, either during the cooling step or during the packaging. The main types of bread spoilage of the baked bread, the finished bread, are moldiness or mold and ropiness or rope. Bread mold. Molds or fungi are the most common cause of spoilage of bread. Generally, the temperature attained during the baking process, the baking temperature is enough to destroy all microorganisms. But after the baking, there will be microbial contamination during the handling or cooling steps. The contamination may come from the air or from the wrappers. The general molds which are responsible for spoilage of bread are Rhizopus stolonifer, which produce a white cottony mycelium with a black sporangia on the surface of bread; Penicillium expansum or Penicillium stolonifer, which grow on the bread producing green spores; Aspergillus niger, which will produce greenish or purplish brown to black spores, and they will produce a yellow pigment which will diffuse into the bread; Monilla cytophila or Neurospora cytophila, which will form pink conidia, and they will grow in a pink or reddish color in the bread. And other spoilage molds which are responsible for the spoilage of bread are Mucor or Geotrichum. The bread mold or the contamination and spoilage of bread by molds are favored by the heavy contamination from mold spores after baking. Such mold spores may come from air during the long cooling time, from the air circulation, or maybe from the contaminated slicing machine. The slicing of the bread after baking, it will introduce more air and more microorganisms inside to the loaf. Another reason for bread mold is wrapping of the bread, packaging of the bread while it is still warm, which will result in an increased humidity within the package, which will allow the growth of microorganisms. And the storage of bread in a warm and humid place also favor the growth of mold in bread and thereby the bread spoilage. The spoilage of bread by mold growth can be prevented by preventing the contamination by mold spores. We should provide adequate and prompt cooling of bread before wrapping. UV irradiation of the bread surface and the slicing machine could be done to prevent the microbial contamination. Electronic heating of the surface of bread can be done. And after packaging, the bread should be stored under cold conditions. And the incorporation of microstatic chemicals to prevent the growth of molds in the bread also helped to prevent the growth of mold in the bread. The next type of microbial spoilage of baked bread is rope or ropiness. This is more common in home baked bread, and this is caused by the bacterium Bacillus subtilis or Bacillus licheniformis. This is a spore forming bacteria which can survive up to 100 degrees Celsius. So after baking, when the favorable conditions are back, the spores will germinate and grow. They will cause the proteolysis of gluten and the hydrolysis of starch. The growth of bacteria, this capsulated bacteria, will result in the ropiness in bread. Ropiness is yellow to brown, a soft and sticky area in the bread with an unpleasant odor. The slimy material that is formed inside the bread can be drawn into long threads when the bread is broken and pulled apart. The next type of bread spoilage is red or bloody bread. This is very rarely occurred. It is due to the growth of Serratia marcescens, which is a red pigmented bacteria. The growth of Neurospira cytophila can also impart red or pink color to the bread. Another organism which can impart red color to the bread, to the crumbs of bread, is Geotrichum aurantiacum. Another spoilage of bread is chalky bread. This is due to the growth of Endomycopsis fibuligera and Trichosporon variable. Their growth will result in the formation of white chalk-like spores in the bread. Coming to the spoilage of cakes and bakery products, which are the cereal products. Here also, molds or fungi are the major reasons for microbial spoilage. Here also, the baking process removes and destroys much of the original microorganisms. The toppings or fillings of the cakes are more prone to microbial growth. The frostings are quite stable due to their high sugar content, and they will not allow much of the microbial growth. And the microorganisms may contaminate and spoil the cakes and bakery products. The generally observed damage or the deterioration known as talling is not due to microbial growth, but it is due to the physical changes that may occur in the cake baked product during the holding or during the storage time. Coming to the spoilage of cereal products, pasta, macaroni and tapioca. In the case of pasta, which is delivered and stored dry, there are seldom reports of spoilage by microorganisms. In the case of macaroni, the spoilage is generally of two types. The first one is swelling due to the gas production by certain bacteria which resemble the Enterobacter. The second type of spoilage, which is generally present in macaroni, is the presence of purple streaks, which are due to the growth of the mold Monnelia. In the case of tapioca, which is prepared from the root starch of cassava, it will get damaged, it will get spoiled only if it is moistened. The spoilage is generally by the growth of the orange pigmented starch hydrolyzing bacteria. The breakfast cereals and snacks contain very low levels of microorganisms, and therefore the spoilage chances of these items are very low. In the case of prepared dough, which are commercially available, they may contain yeast and lactic acid bacteria as inoculum, and there will be also contaminating microorganisms. And this contaminating microbial load depends upon the storage conditions, the quality of ingredients, and sanitary practices involved in their preparation. So, this is all about the spoilage of cereal and cereal products. Thank you so much for listening.